Today, we're going to draw the Statue of Liberty. I'm going to use graphite pencil to develop the drawing, the foundational structure of the drawing, using the drawing method of biggest to smallest, simplest to more complex, and also using a little bit of negative space. Then I want to develop it through watercolor layers. So I'm going to be really looking at the shadow shapes more than anything, and how a touch of shadow makes it magically appear out of the paper. Let's get started. And here in my sketchbook, I'm going to do the same. So I'm going to actually start with graphite pencil. So a very soft, light line, just to get the composition on my page. So I'm going to start with my proportion, my size, and I'm basically looking at that linear quality that I dealt with early on, which was just you saw the shape of that triangle, creating that envelope for our subject. Here I'm doing the same, sticking to a little more of a linear study, as I also consider just a little bit of negative space. But the other thing is, if I divide this into a center line and horizontal line, where is my center line? And that places me exactly where. Because obviously we have a lot of open space and we have this heavy to the left composition. That you need to consider. And as I do a linear study, I'm also doing somewhat of a quick negative space study. Reconnecting and keeping my eyes on my reference. That is so important. Can't say it enough. One of the things you need to catch yourself and ask yourself, am I really looking at what I'm supposed to be looking? And how hard am I going beyond looking and seeing what I need to see? Because remember, as always, what is this? Exercise and observation. More than anything, exercise and observation. It's sharpening your observation skills. And that observation means it's a process where I look, something in my mind solves or processes what I think I see, and then sync that to my hand skill and the medium and technique. And when we begin to talk about adding your creative touch, what does that mean? So I should bring it up again. It's also that level of looseness. Your expectation of what it's going to look like in the end. Do you want an absolute replica of what we see here? Or do you want just a little bit of stylized, adding a personal touch of how your technique allows you to play with the medium I'm taking a little extra time here, right in this area, to really pay attention to those crossing and the relationship between some of these elements. And it's not the elements, it's still a line study. But because there are so many of them, I want to make it easier later on to understand, so not confuse myself by adding too many elements that I won't need. Just the basic essential line that will almost come together on its own. And it's already beginning to appear as actually a little more than where I wanted to take it. Meaning, by definition, just adding a little too much definition, it's going beyond where I need to be right now. Coming together beautifully. Let's bring in a little bit of eraser, a little cleanup here and there. And the decision is, in my mind, is still, okay, how far do I need to take this pencil drawing? If it's going to be just a graphite drawing, well, then we go all the way and develop a beautiful pencil drawing. At some point, I plan on maybe bringing water-soluble watercolor pencil, or I mentioned ink pens. Now, that's going to be the ultimate decision there. One or the other. And if I just wanted to do watercolor and develop a beautiful watercolor drawing, at what point do I have enough information to move on to that stage? So you notice here, yes, I am keeping these lines very, very light. Clean it up just a little more. And we have also the variation from portrait to sharp, metal, but very intricate in terms of angle and edges, to that anatomical softness, and then that drapery. There's all kinds of things that are going to kind of make you hop around in terms of just a little extra focus than usual. And maybe a little closer look, making sure you're taking even as close of a look, zooming in to that reference. So for example, areas like this, I think I have one and I prepared, there we are. Just zoom in and screenshots of a lot of these line qualities here. And as I said, it does look more complex, harder than it actually is. Remember, it all comes down to lines, shapes, and forms. And when I mean forms, that means how the light is behaving in and around those lines and shapes. So it all comes down to quality of that line. What's the edge of that line? How do they form a shape? What is that shape? And when I talk about shape, you could also think about the shape of the light or the shape of the shadow now. Not just the shape of the thing. It breaks down, and you continue to break it down. And you need to see the shape of that shadow. And forget for a second that you're looking at a sleeve of a robe, but instead just lines that come together in shapes, and those shapes have shadows and light, and those also have shapes. They line up very specifically. So the relationship between those shapes but you should not make it more complex than it actually is. The idea for better results is to simplify it, to make it more elementary. Meaning, take it back. Take it back to geometric, take it back to line, if you have to, and just one line at a time. And remember, the line, it has its own shape. So is it straight? Is it more horizontal, more vertical, more diagonal? Does it have a curve? And if so, is it concave, convex? And depending on how much attention you give to each one of those, and it's not all of them that need that much attention. There are some that are very specific, that give it all. Meaning they really bring this out together. And those are the fundamentals. How do I see them? Well, one way, if you haven't done it yet, squint. If you squint, you're gonna first of all see the biggest shapes of light and shadow. Those are you could basically do those. Anything beyond those big shapes, where you just have two values, light and dark, and you should see there's one right here, right at the armpit, underneath that big fold, and then down here you have another, which comes right down into the side. And yes, you have light inside of it, shifting shadows that are values. But for now, you just have those two big ones. And you map out that light, shadow, just through its shape. And just to show you a little bit closer, that's the kind of line work I'm doing for the side. And am I getting a little carried away? Well, the way I planned it in my head, this is where it needed to go, and we could see the arm coming up right into some of the lines that will become probably one of those focal points. And notice how simple. They're just a couple of tap, tap, tap lines and just a little bit of that form there, giving us those fundamental, essential structural lines. That's where we need to be. But here, I think I'm ready to make a decision and begin to actually work. Maybe that watercolor is going to be the best solution, since I already have this intricate line work. Yes, still trying to keep it a little light, but hopefully so you could see. Very important to keep reminding yourself. Trying your hardest to make it a strategic part of your work. Looking for simplicity. Finding the answers in simplicity. And that you see in what the masters do so well. They take something that, no matter how complex it looks, and they find that essential quality, that essential line, shape, light, form, play of color, contrast, all those variations of what we've talked about so much, the fundamentals, and bring them together in the simplest way. And although it still may look complex to you, it's the technique that they have developed that makes it look so easy. But when you try it, you run into problems. And that usually is the way of thinking about it. It's the way we think about it mostly. And that, again, I think it is exactly what happens in life, in real life. You could have any problem finding a simple solution. What they say, sometimes depending on it, not drowning in a glass of water, but being able to see how There's always a way, there's always a solution, and usually it's the simplest. And I think that is one of the most beautiful things about art forms, any art form, that it allows you to think truly in a creative way, to see what actually is there, and then from there, solve the puzzle. What you don't want to do is create more problems or more complex problems than there are already. So I have this beautiful play of, we have a cast shadow, and that's the shape I'm working here. And then we have this beautiful reflected light. And that's going to be another one of those focal points where first I need to see my portrait. So I'm going to that center line, and I need to find that eye line. So I could really begin to divide the planes of the face. And this would take me maybe even further up. But once you have that, again, focusing on, need to zoom in just a little bit closer. There we are. As I work different areas, I really need to get a better look at what really is going on there, and just decoding these shadow shapes. It's a good way to put it. Basically decoding linear, shift in values, but those shadow shapes, and some are just so easy. I mean, they literally just show you all the secrets. They're not hiding anything. So I feel like I'm pushing for a heightened rendering of this beautiful image. And again, it's all how you want to see it. For me, and then it goes a little bit beyond the connection to the subject, the meaning, especially with the 4th of July, which was just perfect. So how you want to present it, it really goes also beyond just what I've been talking about, more than just lines and forms. It does have that special meaning, and we're talking about any subject here. But in order to get there, you really want to stick to the basics. It's the only way. So we talk about how that style comes together, how you begin to solve by asking questions. And the question could be, well, should I use ink? Should I use charcoal? Should I use pencil? You're posing questions that are going to present a problem, but they're also solving the problem. So you realize that that's what you're doing. You continue to do that, and then you try to do it in a challenging but efficient way. Sometimes knowing your limitations, but taking risks. I should know my limitations here when it comes to, okay, how am I going to deal with ink lines and then value? From experience, I know that maybe I should just stick to watercolor, which would be kind of playing it safe, but I can pretty much bet on the results. My expectation will be, in the end, a happy one. And that's what you want. Very subtle shifts here. And it's always that too. It's finding ways to practice, finding subjects that are challenging, that allow you to practice what you need to practice. And what you need to practice, only you know. I mean, you keep asking the question, and that is it better linear qualities? Is it my brushwork? Is it my blending? Is it my color scheming? Is it on and on and on it goes. So this drawing coming together, and I begin to see it much, much easier now. But at the same time, every time we add a line, we add a new problem. And the closer, I always say this, the closer we get to the end, the closer we are to the conclusion of that adding one more brushstroke, one more line, one more something problem. But it all starts right here. From this stage, you can actually do so much that will be efficient in the end. I'm going to go ahead and finish this here as well, since I have just a little bit of a better look. A nice just look at the form. And whether you need to count these or not, and you could, what I want to really pay attention to here is the space and also the perspective. So we get that sense of rounding. There's beautiful shadows also inside, and they're going to be very tiny. But even within, there's a top shadow, cast shadow in every single one of these. And will that make my drawing stronger, or will it just again push it too far into that area of overcooked? It all has to do with experience. How do you see it before it's really there? It takes a little bit of seeing it, which is visualizing it basically. And how I bring together all of these beautiful shadows here. Now I got a little bit of work here with very cautious with the angles. And a little bit of angle as I also draw the shape, and then the side. So I want to be a little bit, especially negative space here. And then the length of it. Plus the shadow. There's a tiny bit of cast shadow, which is great. But the biggest thing is how you're dealing with perspective here. How you're seeing the projection into space. As we also understand from the position of these elements that they are radial. So they kind of come together at a center. So those angles should somehow make sense, but visually we know we go by what we see. So checking those angles. And for me, one easy way is by looking at the negative space, the shapes of the negative space. This one comes all the way to the edge, and now everything begins to kind of line up. Making sure we could use that side as a little bit of light with a little bit of shadow on the underneath side. And as it rounds away, we see a little more of the underneath, not so much of the side. All those little things. And there we go. So you kind of see my drawing there. Going to be working a little extra on this side. As it begins to fully come together, we kind of get that clearer picture. The amount of care I put into actually studying these relationships between these lines. And what I mentioned earlier, simplifying even this complex study of drapery, which is an art form all on its own. You see tons and tons of masters' sketches of drapery, different fabrics with different lighting conditions. And the reason for that, it's amazing how you really have to think abstract. Isolating all of that information kind of out to truly find just, once again, those basic things. There we are. And those basic things are, again, the linear quality, the shapes of light and shadow, zoom in just a little more here on this end side on the other area. We also see a little bit of that text that is there. And the side of just a few fingers. Again, very basic, mostly focused on the shadow shapes, some of the linear quality, and that should solve the puzzle easily. If you isolate, squint, and just solve the shadow shapes and see some of the linear quality of the edge, that's it. Don't think fingers or hand. Just figure out and try to really recognize the shadow shapes. There are cast shadows, and then there's shadows of the form here, which should come together very easy. And there we are. So we come to this side, but there's still a lot of drawing up here, up by the torch. And we do have some text. Again, just with shadow, I think we have just a little bit of cast shadow, and that will show it. Very basic. There we are. So let's go to just the finishing touches up here. We have all the shadows. I'm going to do this a little looser, just a little bit. I mean, it shouldn't be the one. There's so many, and I'm going to do that maybe with a little bit of that line, but mostly watercolor. Just letting it create that natural detail, basically. Instead of forcing the detail drawn in, what I want to do here is just let the watercolor create some of that. Again, shadow shapes, lots of contrast. We have lots of shadow and then cast shadow, and then we have some oops, just a little too big here. Beautiful perspective with some of the angles and the bends of these fingers. But you don't want to use that word. You just want to, again, simplify down to line, shadow shapes. And trust. Trust what you see. I may have to readjust the position of everything from here to the top. That's fine. That's why we kept that early foundational drawing, just to give us a tip. And it shifted maybe half an inch. No, I'm sorry, not that much. But just a tad to the top, allowing this to feel more natural, more trying to keep it very simple in terms of linear quality. But realizing that with shadows and shift, you will make miracles happen. And there's tons of contrast here. There's lots of play with light and shadow in there. Squint for a second and you'll see it. And yes, because there's a lot more, call it detail, linear quality elements, smaller, rhythmic, repetitive, ornamental also, as we get here to the top. So I'm going to want to do that in a much looser way. It's not going to take away, it'll definitely call for too much attention. So I'll do that again with quick sketch, a little bit of negative space, most of it watercolor. And finally, we have that beautiful flame. And that's going to be interesting, how all the light and shadow, but most importantly, that gold color will be achieved. There we go. Wow. Okay. So did I spend too much time in my drawing? Good question. Now, I mentioned I was going to use some of that water-soluble watercolor pencil, but from my original study, the sketch, I think it would have to be a little bigger maybe. for me to be able to control the quality of, especially the light. I want very subtle shifts in that value. So the first thing I'm going to do is just add a wash. I'm not going to work any background. And if I do, I'll do it after the fact. It's not going to be a full gradient wash. You could do that. What I want to do is really focus on the metallic. Just touch a little bit of phthalo green into it. And I'm trying to maybe test the color. I should test the color. Let's go ahead and do that up here. So I'm using a very low value. And what I'm using is a cobalt turquoise with a touch of phthalo green. But I really want it to be ultra light. So I'm going to start with just basically water. And just give it a nice, very light ultra light wash. And this is wet on dry, but I'll bring in a little water here and there to play with the technique. And I'm pretty happy with the color mixture. You see there's just a hint. But when I bring in that contrast, and that's what I want to develop, beautiful shifts in value through layering. And because we almost have a monochromatic, almost fully monochromatic, with just a few shifts here and there. But overall, it's going to be a lot easier to just focus on the simple things. I say simple, but when it comes to putting together those value shapes and reading the light, developing shadow shapes, as I said all along, you want to make it as easy as possible, as simple as possible. You can still be gestural and creative and loose. Let that technique show up, which means, yeah, you could be, spattering and you name it, bringing it all together. Adding just a little more water, making sure the light is going to play extra. Especially on the face. Making sure you're using the right brush for the different stages as well. And I have ideas later on as the shapes get smaller, more complex, obviously darker and more saturated. I'm also going to bring a little bit of the background into play with just a few shapes, maybe abstract shapes of, as I'll see what color, if maybe just that background, beautiful sky blue would play out. And there's my first wash. And from now on, when I deal with this, is making sure I have the right brush and making sure my technique is all about timing, because I want to take advantage, as always, of that wet on wet, making sure I get almost let it paint itself. So those shapes, what I'm trying to do is capture, and it's drying fast. So I want to make sure I mix my color. And as I mentioned, I am going to go back to that mixture of cobalt. And I want to have something, a neutralizing color. So because we have a yellow-green, I'm going to go a little more into the violet to create those shadows. But also saturating the color little by little. I'm going to do my first test here with some of these shadows. You want to be careful where some of those first touches are. And wow, that immediately brings tons of contrast, but it is drying up way faster than I was expecting it to. So I'm going to have to soften up and work these values maybe into 2, 3, possibly 4 stages. But you see, as soon as I add that shadow, and again, I'm going with the biggest, simplest shadow shapes here. No linear quality yet, although there are some. It's going to be about technique. How do I get some of that reflected light quality where I can begin to bring it out, especially because I know there's going to be other areas of shadow that I could just darken. But what about the reflected light? Well, I want to make sure I have a technique of, for example, lifting. And I could just lift. And here's where I bring in the new brush, smaller brush, soften some of these edges. So by adding just the right amount of water, making sure I have my paper towel ready to go, and drying, squeezing it, all the moisture out of my brush to get that perfect quality. Literally drawing with the dry brush to lift. This also has tons of technique qualities that you need to think about. For example, I mentioned that the moisture on the paper, how it dried a little faster than I expected it to. But also the opacity of your pigment, the staining capability. So if it stains fast, you're not going to be able to lift. Now I'm timing my moisture to drop in. And you could see that areas where there's a little more saturation, there's a little extra shadow. And these are the kind of qualities that I wanted to have, where it's not necessarily, I'm going to use the word precise in terms of the application, but more playful. The way I described it is almost as if it drew itself, as if it painted itself, letting the water do what it does best. So starting on this area, I begin to see how that's working, and I want to make sure I have this perfect reflected area of light as one of those highlights for the quality of technique that I want to use. Yes, I'm getting a little more linear here at the edge, but immediately bring that back and soften the edge. So how you would deal with the rendering, if you are dealing with the drapery, how you deal with the rendering of the shifting values there. If you are at all, my technique is basically softening the edge. Applying linear quality, then softening the edge. And the timing for that is crucial. And I don't want it to get too, again, managing contrast. I want that light to actually show. I don't want to overwhelm it with too much shadow where everything gets too dark too fast and then it's lost. So I'm beginning to see a little bit of that happening here. That early wash is beginning to get lost. So I'm going to have to test my first shadow. And I'm going to need a little bit of blue. So I'm going to use ultramarine. I was thinking cobalt. Let me see if I can add it just right here into the mix. I'm going to create a violet that it's a little redder. And why is that? I'm going to neutralize that turquoise, that yellow green turquoise. And making sure I have the right amount of. So this is what it would look like. I'll put it here next to. That's very, very dark. And I want to see just by lowering the value if it is where I want it. So once again, only one way to know. We're going to mix in a little bit of turquoise, little by little. And wow, did it get interesting right away. No, this is a lot. I mixed a lot. And what I want is low value. But it's a very interesting mix. It's beginning to look a little grayer. Test it again. So this would be my shadow color there. And best way to see it is just put it in there. So I wanted this to be mostly wet on wet, but the paper's drying so fast. It's not the typical paper. This is the sketchbook paper. And I think I just nailed it here. First try. Second layer, soften some of these edges. And what's going to happen is you're going to begin to see a little bit better read for the shadows. But best thing is how those lights are going to jump out. So this is one that if you really want to work folds and drapery like this, it is precise. You have to have clear intentions with technique. So a clear strategy is what I mean. And good timing if you are doing it with watercolor. So automatically I see the improvement between those two layers. And I got to come in real fast and soften some of these edges. And it's going to almost be a very slow timing of each of the stages to get that shadow and reflective light quality. But it is working. And what made it really, really work was that shade that I was able to mix. Now, if you are working that drapery quality, understanding how, why, what they're doing, how they're coming, going, folding, in, towards, away from you, and being able to read that light, as I mentioned, it's an entire study on its own. Something the masters did lots and lots of. You see tons and tons of that quality of work as apprenticeship. And it's something you could just, with you name it, a towel, any cloth, and the fancier you get, say, for example, silk or burlap, maybe, all the variations of it, and just throw it around somewhere with hopefully good light. I mean, what you want is lighting conditions, so you have that play of light on it, and then render from life. And that should give you hours of fun. But most importantly, practice, and you're going to be practicing something that is indispensable. I mean, you won't find it in anything else. Figure drawing, it'll make everything else easier because of the abstract way which you have to approach the thinking through and the deconstruction of everything that's going on, especially with light, how to handle transitions of value and transitions of light. So you're seeing how I'm developing this sort of slow. Let's go up here. Making sure you had that right mixture if you did a first wash. But notice when I just put in a shadow, and I can manipulate some of that reflected quality. So just pulling that and softly creating a shift in that value, how it works. These get a little darker. But the inside, clean my brush, they get a little softer and rounder. And that right there, that's my fingers. So just a few brush strokes, literally linear brush strokes with a bit of softening of the line. Harsher shadow right underneath, recognizing what is cast shadow and what is form shadow. Let's bring this really interesting one here. Because here we're dealing with muscle and anatomy, you really want to make sure you get this one. I always say the one and done, and that would be the ideal. Just lay it down, make sure technique, and that right there, just like that, it works. That reflective light quality. The only thing I see is maybe adding a little extra contrast to this side, just to show that that was too much. Lift. So there you go, another example. Don't push too far. making sure contrast is part of your study. The managing of how you manage the transition of all areas of contrast. So we talk about it a lot. It's the contrast between sharp and soft, obviously light and shadow. Color contrast. Atmospheric contrast. Again, that's using juxtaposition and sharp or blurry to indicate where in space the area you're working with reflects. Not many that we have to deal with here, just mostly the one I'm focused on is that light shadow shift and the transition. So let's begin to move just a little more into, and hopefully as I see and we begin to work with some brushstroke, we get a little more into the portrait. So we have some really interesting shifts, not just in shadow. I mentioned that reflected light quality with the cast shadow, and then the form shadow that has a little bit of that reflected light. So I'm going to shift the hue, a little bit of the color contrast here, just underneath, by adding this shadow color to that green turquoise, which is a different one. Let's do that quickly, taking advantage of that moisture. And I'm going to bring that lower value right on the side here. Now this is the area where if you really want to get, it's meticulous, it's quick, it's technique, it's all about how to handle perfect timing. Again, if you're working with watercolor. Multitude of techniques. Wet on dry, softening the edge, and I'm also doing lifting and softening the edge. So from one to the next, just to get that hint of soft edge, contrast between the cast shadow and the reflected quality of that beautiful transition. And I think I got it. Moving back to the, maybe just add a little extra shadow to this. Start with the low value. Let me go ahead and zoom in once again. There we are. So as I said, I have close-ups of different areas. So I could just see the shapes a little bit better. And this is really just fine-tune work here. Just sharp, delicate. Well, yeah, we are working with facial features, but it's not, I don't want to say complex. It is simplified. When you think about it, just squint, see the general largest shape, and then from there you can see a variation of some of the values. And if you can deconstruct it from there, it becomes a lot easier. Hoping that that original layer that I put down holds. And I'll let that dry because there's a shift in darker values that are actually what give this the likeness. But again, squinting, you should see the biggest and darkest. And that should be your focus. Without any detail, pretty much. It's just try to capture the shape of those shadows. And be amazed at how it just whoop comes together. I'm going to move ahead really quick. Take advantage while this dries just a little so I can soften that edge without ruining the inner shape. And I'm going to add just a little extra right through here. And it's going to be sort of the same approach as we did on the other side. There we are. Soften just a touch at the top. This is very delicate. It's not something that makes or breaks. And there it is. There's just a subtle shift. And I also want to make sure I bring that right here to the side. So bring in a little extra water and very, very careful shift of value. So you have clear difference. And there, planes of the face. There we are. So again, softening, wet on wet, softening some edges, and also lifting. All of them simultaneous. That's what's going on. Let's bring it down here. This is going to be just, again, another shape. Trying to stay as true as possible to it. Forgetting everything you know, just making sure you capture what you see. And all it is a shape. Adding a little touch of extra value here. And these are those just almost linear qualities, really. Where you see a little bit of the rendering. Of what would be the eye or the iris. And just shifting value, getting as many delicate transitions, but true to what's there. I'm going to add just an extra touch of the original. Just to create extra contrast on the side here. And on this area of the hair. So it's going to take a few layers Very delicate, just like I've done here. Going from flat wash to more linear. To the use of technique, where you could begin to see soft edges. And there's a lot of detail even within some of these areas. I'm not sure if I want to add all of that. Remember that cautionary, just that advice of, as we reach further into, closer and closer to the end, every mark is almost twice as dangerous. So you need to have a very, very patient, careful approach. It shouldn't be tight. It's not about, well, I really got to slow down. No, it's just making sure you're not rushing. You're maintaining and sticking to the original strategy. If you see changes, making sure you analyze first. So it's kind of a fully understood decision. Well, how would I know unless I dab it, put it in there? Well, you'll know. So if it was the right choice, great. There was something intuitive about how you came up with that answer. But understanding that if it wasn't, if you rushed through that decision, then you lost and you could lose what was there. Sometimes pretty much forever. There's no way to get it back. Sometimes depending on your medium, with drawing or charcoal, yeah, there's ways to somehow work your way back to where you were. But even then, things alter. They're changed. So it's that super important phase where decisions become more and more consequential in a way. A way to think about this is, it's called an open drawing. So what I started doing with that long or prolonged linear study, slowly developing, the longer you stay open, the more chance you have to go back and readjust. But once you begin to close, meaning you commit, whether it's to a line or a shape or a technique, then that's it. It's there. The more you begin to close it out, the harder it is to make a correction. I'm going to use a little bit of that shadow. Bring it in here. And yes, there are going to be lots of linear quality. If I wanted to bring, for example, this shadow, making sure I have the right brush for it. There it is. And just soft touch, drawing with the brush basically. And just dabbing the paint in. We can actually see how it really delivered that three-dimensional look. So remember, as we started big and simple to small and more complex, As we begin to get small, complex, dark, and sharp, it is more consequential. There we go. Seeing some of that shadow really brings out the illusion of how this object occupies space and what light is doing to it. So when we read light properly and we apply it to any form, the illusion becomes more and more complete. More and more, in a way, it would be realistic. I'm having an issue here with just a little more color, but making sure the right value is applied right here on the jaw. And it's a risky one because I already have something that's beautiful. But yeah, it needed just that extra touch here. So when you're going from a darker to a lighter value, that transition stage, and because this was, again, I keep talking about that reflective quality, it can become a little dangerous, risky. And also because I'm working with a very tiny brush here, the level of precision is more demanding. But a great way to test and push your skill level, technique level. So I'm going to move let's see, just a little more into this top area with maybe a little more phthalo green just to make a bit of a distinction here. See it just a little more metallic. And notice very, very simple approach. Quick. That was just a very quick, very gestural type approach while squinting. And I want to add the shadow here, which will continue. Remember, that's the other thing, continuity, consistency throughout. So if I start very detailed, very linear, very in terms of value, I want to keep that consistency throughout the entire image. Unless there's a reason why you wouldn't want it. But most of the time it's, especially when there's hands and feet involved, you see drawings become really fully, worked, but the hands and feet are like, whoop, kind of skipping through them, avoiding them. That's a good way when you look at someone's artwork and you can tell the level of focus all the way through is how they manage consistency throughout the work. Sometimes it's due to the subject matter, areas that are more demanding, and mostly demanding in terms of skill level. So these shadows are going to shift here because we have more light in front of it. So I'm going to add that cobalt turquoise to the mix. And then my shadow color should be a little lighter as well. Test it over here. And immediately I'm going to try to get just a little more linear. And try to time that perfect moment of moisture so I can soften that as well. Let's go ahead and bring this. I remember mentioning here the shadows. It's just cast shadow, cast shadow, cast shadow. And just like that, we have 3 fingers. But I want to soften the edge just a little bit. So we also have the rounding of the form. And that's it. This one became a little too dark right here. So let's go ahead and lift just a little bit. We also have the shadows that I mentioned right underneath the text. And then a little water to pull to the side of them. You see a little bit of shifting sometimes with a little bit of the metal look of it. Bringing in just a little drop of water there. And continue with our shadow. Linear qualities. And a lot of it is working just as is without having to soften some of the edges. Also, when you have more direct light, you have harsher shadows. So your cast shadows, the harder, the brighter the light, the darker the shadows. And again, intricate work that should be done with patience. As I said, you study, and it's the only way it can. Really be achieved as you would expect by applying the level of attention that it would need. And again, that all depends on what I said early on, your level of expectation. Is it something more gestural, or do you just want photorealism, likeness, absolute likeness? Well, that is then going to pretty much dictate how you're going to approach this. Using a little bit of a bigger brush now, I have to maybe switch so we get a little bit of that. In this case, a little more gestural shift in values here, since it's not going to be as precise. It's not exactly what I wanted in the beginning. Just a little more focus, yes, but not a full rendered study of just the robe. It's the overall. And I think the light reads pretty well. But as I said early on, it was the trick, the secret was in how you handled the shadow shapes. Now let me go ahead and finish up. My last thing here will be trying to capture that gold. So obviously we could use a warm yellow ochre. I'm going to use a little bit of just a touch of red. This is cadmium red. I'm going to start again with a very light wash, sort of to preserve the light. And there's a nice highlight and a few strokes right at the top as well. But it does get darker, so I'm going to create a neutralized shadow or shade of this color. But that's pretty close. So this is basically just a yellow ochre or going towards orange. I'm just going to go ahead and touch it with a tiny bit more red. Grab a little bit of yellow, but this time it's more red-orange. And I'm just going to use this wet on wet to bring it in right here as a layer. All of it wet on wet. Do a little bit of softening. Give it that slick metallic curve. And I think it's almost there. Wow. Let's go ahead and just grab a little bit of yellow and really bring down the value to just touch in and around, because now this is too white for the highlight. And there we have it. So, excellent study, beautiful subject. So many variations and chances to really play with all different kinds of very, very important things in your that you need to be aware in terms of your technical skill. So lots of opportunities, from facial features, anatomy, portraits. First time I believe we do folds, and we should look a little more into that. But overall, just the simplicity of studying light shadow shapes and how to put them together. I hope you guys enjoyed it.